Test, test.
Hi everyone, sorry for the delay. You can all come closer too if you want. So I have several panelists here to talk about the history of Starbucks organizing from what feels like a long time ago to very recent. So just because of time, how about we just have everyone do a very, very brief, are we good? A very brief introduction of themselves and their connection to Starbucks. Yeah, we can go from the farthest from me to the closest to me.
I'm Sylvia Baldwin. I have been a Starbucks worker since summer of 2022. I work at a union store here in Philadelphia, 34th and Walnut on the UPenn campus. I am a worker leader on the campaign. I help out with our contract action team, our national committee for planning our escalation. I'm also a bargaining delegate. I've helped plan a lot of our national strikes and also local actions, and I still participate in bargaining with the company on location across the table from them to the extent that bargaining happens. I am there and going to be here until we win.
Awesome. I'm Daniel Gross. I'm currently a member and on staff of a new organization called SUN, which is the Solidarity Union Network. We are an organization of early stage emerging unions that are led and operated by workers, oriented towards direct action and aim for fundamental change. I am a former Starbucks barista. I worked at Starbucks from 2003 to 2007, I believe. I think those were the dates. I worked in New York City on Madison Avenue at the store on 36 in Madison. And my coworkers and I at that store got a union started called the IWW Starbucks Workers Union. And amazingly from that store, got to spread all around. And I think we'll be talking a little bit about that today. But when Echo, thank you Echo for having me. But when I heard that while I was in Philly, there's going to be an opportunity to connect with the amazing, courageous, inspiring baristas of this generation, I was very thrilled and honored.
Hi, everybody. My name is Zachary, he, him pronouns. I was a SALT with the Starbucks Buffalo organizing campaign back in 2021. I was part of the original cohort of SALTs that was recruited. At the time, I've salted in numerous campaigns. I have served as like a co-director in several salting intensive unionization campaigns, and I am currently a full-time staffer with the UAW Harvard Graduate Students Union.
I'm Gershom, he, him. I'm a volunteer organizer with Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee and Tech Workers Coalition. And I'm really, I think, just invited to talk about the relationship of Starbucks organizing and all the stuff that these people have so much experience with some of the other stuff going on in the labor movement more broadly that EWOC has been plugged into. So really honored to be on this panel with all of these incredible organizers.
Thank you, everyone, for coming here. And so we'll start with this question, too, which is, what's the historical background of the union movement and kind of how it arrives into the times of the early 2000s? This is for Gershom, who has a lot to say on this.
Okay, I thought this was going to go more to the Starbucks folks first to talk about their side, but I can talk about sort of what I wanted to say about just thinking about how and where Starbucks fit into the broader picture. Yeah. And to go really way back, and this is actually mentioned a bit in Jazz Brissak's wonderful book, Get on the Job and Organize, is something that people don't tend to know is that what we think of as sort of the definitive models of American unionism and the steelworkers and so on were, before they were organized, considered unorganizable. They were considered, they had too much high turnover. The workers in them were sort of rabble and looked down on. They were largely immigrant. The 1919 steel strike, I think I can say this word because it's no longer a slur, was called the hunky strike, which was a derogatory term for Polish workers. And so a lot of the things that you hear about the difficulty of organizing service workers today were said about the steel workers in 1919. The difference is that eventually there was successful organizing. And in the course of that, that transformed what people thought of the workforce and its conditions and its power. And that came from the structure of organizing and not from just some innate quality of the job. That parallel is really important because what we had from the 1970s onwards, and many of us know, is a long, slow structural decline of American unionism to just devastatingly low levels of density. Throughout the course of that, I would say not the cause of that, but throughout the course of it, we had this fixed notion of unions that came from the upsurges through the 30s, and then there's sort of how they became fixed in place in the 50s. And so to get out of it, however it came about, which we don't have time for, we necessarily needed to reconceive what a union could be again, and sort of to have like a butterfly emerging from a cocoon. Some sort of new vision of what unionism could be, because you're not going to get people to want to join those things, and they were hemorrhaging members. And I think of Starbucks workers as a pivotal moment in really a blossoming and a transformation in the American labor movement that began to occur. And again, I don't know, I haven't been timing myself how much I want to talk about, but there's a number of convergent factors that are all really important here, and that began to change the picture, starting with the 2008 financial crisis, and then Occupy, not so much for what it did, but for how it reflected a generation that was going to grow up and not see that they were going to live better than their parents, and had a different relationship to work and labor and capitalism than what came before. And a whole period through, and meanwhile, throughout the 90s, as people were recognizing this decline in unionism, there were a number of efforts to turn things around that led to rather bitter disputes. And we can talk more about the different organizing models. But I think the important thing to recognize is you can't just have the will to turn things around. A lot of what was discussed were ways of doing the things they knew how to do, which were not the things that built the unions, but just the things they knew how to do by the time they hit the 90s, and just doing them harder and more and better. And instead, what needed to happen was people needed to start doing things differently. But they couldn't start doing that until the ground was seeded, until the consciousness was different. And then by the time we hit the Starbucks moment, you have this amazing constellation of things. You had people who had been tilling the soil for years and carrying through different historical traditions, reviving them. And on top of that, you have COVID. You have people being called essential workers and saying, "Am I?" Then you have Black Lives Matter, and you have this explosion of militancy and this convergence of things. And that all created this moment in which you had the spark, you had the kindling, you had the perfect weather for it, and then Starbucks became exemplary of this whole transformation that we in EWOC also have been benefiting from and being part of. And that's what I really want to say about the history in a way. And then just to note that also, if you listen to the Starbucks, the podcast, Heat the Ground Up, they talk about this just like the book does. There was something so beautifully fitting. I almost cried when I first learned that the project to start the salting was internally called Project Germinal, after the Zola novel. And, you think about that, the sowing and the reaping. And we're just at the beginning of that. So that's this, and there's a lot to learn from that we can talk about later. But that's, to me, the history.
And I also would want to ask Daniel, too, if you have any additions to this to ground us more in coming to 2000.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I came of age, as they say, started working like in the late 90s, early 2000s. And this is a time when like labor was really on its back, deeply weakened. There was many people, even good people, who were like, labor is over, working class struggle is over. We need different ways to struggle, but never mind this worker thing. And actually, before I got to Starbucks, I worked at a bookstore chain called Borders Books and Music. So it was like, some people know Borders, okay. Amazon took down Borders subsequently, but it was a very kind of like dominant chain where whole strip malls would all be kind of surrounding these Borders, huge bookstores. And that was my start into understanding like what was really going on in these multinational corporations, working there as a bookseller, a lot of exploitation, all the things. And then had some other adventures in the economy. Shout out to my comrade here. We got fired together from another job. But then when I got to Starbucks, I was like, damn, I thought these other companies were like good at exploiting me, like kind of good at messing with my physical health and sucking out all my energy on shift and, screwing with me. But no, Starbucks had actually got to like a whole new level of how to screw over the workforce. And now fast forward to today, we know that is the dominant economic model in all of our jobs, pretty much. Maybe there's some people who've avoided this, but I think the vast majority of us who go to work probably can say our needs are not being met there. So I always like to point out that with all the challenges of today, and I know there's a lot of reasons to be pessimistic, I'm personally very optimistic, because when I compare how things were for me when I entered into the workforce, there was if you turn to your coworker and said union, in many industries, in many states, you're gonna get met by a blank stare at best. And even just in terms of the conversations, today we have so many like great people that will write about working class struggles and stories. And not that those people did not exist back then, but it was really few and far between. And in the kind of mainstream type media, they literally got down to one guy that was reporting on labor stuff, literally. So fast forward to today, we have so many challenges, but I continue to remain very, very optimistic about all the motion that we're experiencing in the working class right now. I think is something really significant.
And before we go on to talk about the IWW Starbucks Union in general, if any other panelists have things they'd like to add on to this, I'd like to just give a moment. But if not, then we can continue with this story. So you got the Starbucks, and there was this union you mentioned before, the IWW Starbucks union. Can you just briefly maybe outline this campaign, where it came from, its tactics, its strategy, and what happened?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had tried without knowing much about unionism twice before to kind of organize at my jobs, but I was just very impatient and I knew little and I was like, we need justice yesterday. So I would just find any and all reason and any and all space to like challenge management on all their BS. And I got fired from those places. But what was kind of good about those experiences was the first one propelled me into unionism, and then the second one even more together started to get me really interested in like what causes victory in unionism. Like, how do you win? Because it's great to take a moral stand and do the right thing and say the right thing in the right moment, but then if you're not actually making change and making the job better, ultimately that gets old quickly, right? Getting fired instead of having the job that you imagine. So by the time I got to Starbucks, I had been trained. I knew more about these things. So I started with like very patient work of it's really as simple as turning to a coworker on the shop floor during a shift at the cafe and just saying, hey, are you down to meet and talk about work stuff like Tuesday? Right? It was like as simple as that. It really started that way. Now I've gotten to work with and train and accompany thousands of workers in many industries, but I always try to honor, like I try to remember my early experiences because that was scary. That was scary to actually do that, to turn to a coworker. Shout out to Joy. I still remember my first ever proper one-on-one invitation was a yes to meet and a yes to form a union together. But we stayed underground for like 15 months, something like that, and went public at that time. You know, of course, it's no surprise to anyone here, but the company immediately started a very muscular, brutal union busting effort because, you know, they wanted to keep paying us $7.75 an hour in New York City. They wanted us to be all part-time and not guarantee us any hours, all these things. But thankfully, we were able to stay the course. We started, you know, growing in New York. First, we were really young. I shouldn't say that had to do with how old we are. We were still new, so we did things like walk into stores with flyers and stuff. But we stopped doing that after a while. Bad idea. Don't recommend that plan. Started coming up with better plans and started to grow around New York City. And I think, if memory serves, I don't remember the exact order, but I think it was then Chicago baristas, I think, united with us. And then I think it was folks in Maryland and Twin Cities came big into the union, Grand Rapids, Michigan, Omaha, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, we started spreading like wildfire, started having relationships in Canada as well. Built relationships with the Chilean baristas who were getting started around that time, and built a really beautiful campaign that chalked up just really victories that changed our lives. I mean, speaking from my own experience in New York City, we won 3 citywide wage increases. Baristas around the country started winning the hours that they needed, much more predictable, secure work hours. We took on countless episodes of racial and gender discrimination, sexual harassment from managers, took on the company in landmark cases, beat the company on issues for everything from choosing the type of, you know, the stores we could organize in versus the company choosing the stores, the right to wear union pins on our aprons, many things. I think looking back, we're talking like 20 years now, so it's been a while, but looking back, I think some of the stuff that is most meaningful to me, and I think was to a lot of coworkers, Starbucks had Dr. King's holiday. I at an inferior status to all the other federal holidays. And, you know, disproportionately baristas are folks of color, other marginalized baristas. Dr. King, obviously a tremendous martyr for Black liberation, but also for labor unionism, having lost his life to an assassination while supporting a labor strike of Black sanitation workers. So we're like, no, like we're not gonna allow this. First of all, you're disrespecting a martyr in our movement, and you're also denying us money we need to buy Metro cards to take the subway to work or eat lunch. So we fought them for 3 years on that, in stores, internet, media, busting up their marketing events. We were really relentless, and we prevailed and finally won, and recovering millions and millions of dollars to pay time and a half everyone on a shift or a day worth of shifts. And most importantly, we got to make sure that there was a adequate respect for Dr. King. And the other one actually has to do with Ethiopian coffee farmers. The company, this is shocking, although probably not surprising because we know the corporations do this. They had gone into Ethiopia and started controlling the ancestral homeland names, the names of coffee growing territories. And we're talking about very ancient, deeply rooted history and culture. And Starbucks was profiting selling beans for like $22, and they were only paying the coffee farmers 2.2%. But even worse, the farmers went to try to control the names of their own home territories, and the company was blocking their ability to do that in international bodies. Like I think it was trademark, if I'm not mistaken. They're blocking the farmers. And so the farmers started a campaign to reclaim their own place names so they could benefit from the added price for these beans. And so IWW Starbucks Workers Union, we became the barista arm. We were the folks in the cafes under their leadership. We sent a delegation to Ethiopia of baristas to coordinate and build solidarity. And again, struggled with the company in the stores, on campuses as well, and in the news media exposing their lies. They had claimed to build a big bridge for the coffee farmers, and we found the bridge, it was 10-foot cement. It was complete fraud, and the coffee farmers said, we don't want any of this stuff. We don't want them to build us stuff. We don't want training from them. We know what we're doing. We just want a fair price for our beans, period. That's what our families need. That's what our communities need. We fought them. I don't remember the exact timeline, but it was a long, heavy fight, and the coffee farmers prevailed. The company had to back down from trying to control their place names, and also made a deal with the coffee farmers around the pricing of the coffee. So that's something that definitely look at with a lot of pride. To kind of wrap, I hate to do this because I don't like the union busters, but really a union buster of the time really summed this all up the best. This guy is no longer with us, thank goodness, but he was the top union buster of the era. His name was Richard Berman. And so happened he was on a conference call with like the billionaires, right? And the conference call kind of got famous because someone leaked it. And one of the billionaires on the same call was saying, oh, if we expand union rights, that will mean the end of civilization. Look it up. You can find it online. But on this same conference call, the top union buster ever at that time said, there's a big problem out there. There's a big problem out there. Workers are starting to organize on their own. They're not waiting to be contacted by any type of organization or union or institution. They're getting it started. They're doing the organizing. This problem is the Starbucks problem. So he coined the term looking at our campaign. And that really is the most significant part of what we did, was that it was a worker-led, worker-operated campaign. Not to say we did not work through our union, the Industrial Workers of the World. We did. Not that we didn't have many people doing many things with us. not to say that, but we were the predominant actors, if you want to use that word. We were making the decisions. We were doing most of the work, not all. So that's the good news. The bad news is we would have liked to continue growing, and we would have liked to continue, building power that we had. Ultimately, the company, just for this whole period, was firing our barista leaders, like people like myself. I was fired. Many of us were fired. Some of us want our jobs back. Some of us didn't. But our model at the time, we just couldn't finally overcome that for as long as we would have liked. We would have liked to hold power longer. The really cool thing is that just a few years later, labor was looking at our campaign because people had said, oh, fast food, it's unorganizable. Retail is unorganizable. It's all unorganizable. We had shown that wasn't true. And then some folks who were inspired by our campaign had studied it, had then started something called Fight for 15. And that was a campaign in fast food that just got so much media attention. Like never in my life had I seen like a campaign just really blanket the media, and really changed a lot of thinking around fast food work, service work, how they could be, what we needed in terms of the new economy that we're all living in. So that was a huge piece. And then to see worker organizing again now in so many industries, like every day, it's like, oh, these museum workers who said they'll never organize, these workers at this magazine, people said they'll never organize, these temp workers, now they have a thing, they're never going to organize, but yet they did organize. And then, of course, most of all, I think anyone that has ever worn that green apron at Starbucks, like, we have a lot of empathy for each other because it's a really rough job in a lot of ways. I think most of us actually like the customer contact, but the exploitation, the mind games, all that, when the green apron started stirring again at Starbucks in the last few years, that was definitely something that fills me with great joy. And to see the fabric of struggle continuing now is just totally remarkable.
Yeah, thank you. And kind of going along this path too. So we have someone here who was in one of the first stores to organize in this new wave. And not only that, but you said that you were recruited as a SALT to do this. So I guess two questions here is, first off, can you kind of describe this this campaign in Buffalo and what was like what you went about doing, and second, why you chose to do this, what your motivation and reasoning and thoughts were?
Thank you so much. So the Starbucks campaign in Buffalo was originally conceived of with the hope that it would be an industrial organizing project. This came off of some previous victories organizing baristas, first in Ithaca. Oh, thank you. First in Ithaca, New York, and then later in Buffalo, New York, Gimme Coffee in Ithaca, and then a small franchise called Spot Coffee in Rochester. And the thinking was kind of twofold, right? That by having by working toward an industrial unionizing project, we would be able to, one, prevent non-unionized workspaces from undercutting the unionized coffee shops, right? And undercutting all of the contractual demands and advancements that we made in those spaces. And that also it would be a powerful tool to hold the company, the employer to account in the event of union busting or resistance, right? Because we would be able to kind of coalesce community support around an effective boycott and say, right, don't buy your coffee at a union busting store, go support your local community and your union organized coffee shops, right? So that was how the project was originally conceived. the idea was to distribute salts, in ideally every one of the 20 some odd Starbuckses, that composed the greater Buffalo region. I think it was challenging, and it took us time to ramp up to the sort of coverage that we wanted. I think we also found that there were logistical challenges in getting even distribution of workers throughout the whole kind of geographic region. And so as we sort of contemplated what were our strengths, right, what was realistic, and more importantly, what were we really trying to accomplish? The goalposts moved a little bit, and I think there was a realization that if we could even unionize one store effectively, right, we would have made labor history, right? We would have demonstrated that it's possible to organize in an industry that is conventionally, right, identified as very hostile to organizing. And so we reevaluated, and we looked at where we were really strong and where we had a supermajority, and we filed originally in three stores, I believe. We won in 2, one was contested, it later won. So that was the pathway, and I think that those were really challenging conversations to have, and I can tell you that personally, as a SALT, I think it's very easy to become, to have a strong identification with the organizing campaign at your store in particular, right? To see the success or failure of an organizing campaign as a reflection of your self-worth or your effectiveness as an organizer. That kind of ownership is healthy in a way, but also I think it can induce some like unrealistic or overly ambitious sort of assessments of where your strengths are. I know this was like a weakness of mine. My store had a narrow majority, and I wanted so badly to see my workers unionize and have a strong contract, and I was pushing really hard that we should file too. I think cooler heads prevailed and thought that, a supermajority and really having confidence in being able to win was the most important thing at that moment. And so we eventually did win in creating, the first unionized stores in several decades, right? A couple decades to win recognition. So that was sort of the pathway of that project. What did it look like to be recruited, I guess? Yeah, I think everybody had different pathways to organizing, and everyone had different motivations, right? For some people, I think salting was an opportunity to gain experience and contacts and a foot in the door in union organizing, right? And to find a way to become a professional organizer for some. For others, it was an ultimate expression of solidarity. For some, it was business as usual. I remember one incredible SALT that we had, Corey. I remember over dinner with him, he was saying like, I'm not a inside organizer. I'm a food service worker, right? That's who I am. That's who I've always been. That's why I'm in this fight, right? For me, I think I was motivated strongly by a solidaristic impulse. So everyone was brought in from different areas. I was very fortunate, right, in that I was recruited because somebody that I knew had a personal connection to the people who had originally conceived of the campaign and just recommended me through word of mouth. And I used to have a lot of self-consciousness and self-doubt about how I entered into this movement, right? Where other people had the sort of initiative and the knowledge of organizing spaces to look up for, how it was framed, an internship, online. Yeah, I had to rely on that personal connection, but I think it's actually a really valuable experience because it shows that you don't really need to come from any specific background, right, to be able to have an impact. And in fact, these are skill sets that anybody can learn, that anyone can be effective, that we all have really an intuitive grasp of as workers engaged in the daily struggles. And so I think that's one of the most important lessons, that we can be recruiting from anywhere. And in fact, we should be, because I think some of the conventional pathways that people find their way into salting can be a little self-selecting, right? And can create barriers when we find that workers maybe are not fluid across the experiences of gender or race or class, right, that are really essential for having the deeply rooted relational trust and experiences that are needed to be an effective organizer. So.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess I'll end with comrade over here who has been actually here in Philly. So maybe you can speak about what things have been like since you've started, when you've started, and the trajectory of the campaign since then to today.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been lucky at this point to be around for the vast majority of the campaign, which is crazy because I felt very new when I was hired. I was an assault. I did know about the campaign vaguely, and it's hard to imagine what I could have thought about it at the time because it's so much in my head now. But I was hired at a Starbucks because I needed a job, more than because I was trying to help out. And I actually was excited to discover after being offered the job in my interview, the manager said, "Oh, by the way, it's a union store." And I think I hid my glee rather ineffectively. And this was in July 2022. My store had organized about like 4 months beforehand, so really close to the time that Zachary was doing the same work. And when I started, I was trained in a closed store. The store was closing at noon because more than half the staff had been fired or forced out. And so I like quickly inherited like all of these stories about what had happened after the election and the ways that people's hours were cut, the ways that they were retaliated against, that the company found, any and all opportunity to discipline these workers unfairly. The manager was being asked to make lists, and the manager at the time had actually quit because he couldn't in good conscience like continue being part of that. And so I stepped into this like total dumpster fire, and got sucked in really quickly, and it was just like, what can I do? Like, let me, help any way I can. And so I felt like a baby, and I wasn't trained for it or anything. But now it's like years and years later, and we've gotten so far. I think so much farther than people expected at the time, definitely. And I mean, when it was in Buffalo, I don't think there was a conception that it was going to be this national project, that it was going to explode like this and be like, this single unit across the country like it is now. Though that happened pretty quick because people were energized by it. So yeah, since then we've had more than 700 elections. The company has closed many stores since then, but we've had 700 elections. We have about 5% of stores, corporate operated stores in the States are organized with us, which is a pretty small number. Still, it's a big company. But we've really just focused on sort of back to basics, worker to worker organizing. Like Daniel was saying, like it being like worker led, and like the workers are the ones who have to do the work. We're extremely lucky to have like all of the support that we do have, to have staff people with Workers United who have a lot of experience and are able to be incredible guides and to train workers and to help workers like do what has to be done. But ultimately it's the baristas who have to talk to each other and make asks of each other and move each other past their fear to get anything done. And we've been really successful with that. And I think hopefully our campaign will be the final, death knell of the idea that fast food and service workers are unorganizable, which everyone has sort of touched on, that I think was definitely still an attitude when our campaign started. And even Fight for 15, which was mentioned, which is really cool. It wasn't a campaign of, building union power. It was legislative wins and trying to get, improved conditions in other ways. But but getting the labor movement at large to like see that putting resources and energy and time into a worker to worker campaign in this industry where workers are young and turnover is high, and the sort of common idea is that solidarity is very hard because they're students or they're high schoolers and they don't really care, and it's like a transient sort of job. It's just not true, and it doesn't reflect the reality on the ground at all. My coworkers have kids that they're supporting, and and even still, everyone deserves dignity regardless. And so we've just exploded, and in 2024 we brought the company to the bargaining table. I think there are some other campaigns in the history of the company, and even like in Canada, where they were able to get to the bargaining table, but with such small units that they didn't have a lot of leverage, and they ended up with contracts that were, didn't really get them a lot, and those unions are no longer exist, or those workers aren't organized anymore. And we still don't have a contract. The fight has gone on, and a lot has happened since we went to the table, but we brought Starbucks to the bargaining table, and we bargained in good faith for 9 months, and made an immense amount of progress. We got tentative agreements on things like just cause, non-discrimination, all sorts of different mechanisms for democracy in the workplace, and then, the sort of political winds shifted. The labor board was gutted. They brought in a new CEO, and our leverage changes. But ultimately, where our power comes from is our numbers. And so we're just sort of, to this day, focused on growing our density, that getting that number well above 5%, because we know that's the only thing that ultimately matters, and what's going to get us, the contract that we need. But even without a contract, we've had huge wins. We've gotten the company to, so many things that the company's done that are positive for their workers, they've only done in the last few years because of our pressure, as, incentives for workers to not organize, things that we asked for, that we centered in our demands, like digital tips at point of sale, the company rolled out. And of course, they try to use it to union bust. They roll it out for non-union stores, and only after we beat their ass, does it eventually come to us. But there's a lot of things like that. Expanded parental leave, all these things that just wouldn't happen without the pressure that we've brought on them, and that's without a contract. So I'm excited to see, where it goes. It's a lot of work, but we're digging in. Workers United is dug in on this, and we're gonna win.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I think maybe people can spend about just a short amount of time, like 3 minutes or so, talking about the organizational model, because you've all touched on this, but it seems like there is something in common here, both within Starbucks and the conception of the Starbucks organizing, and also maybe more broadly within EWOC. So maybe, Daniel, you could go first, and then we can go from there and compare.
So yeah, the question of union organizing models, like the overall building blocks of what makes a particular union a kind of union, has kind of fascinated me in the work I've done since I was at Starbucks. I did over 10 years organizing with recent immigrant workers in food manufacturing factories in Metro New York. And then the last 5 years, I've been organizing with folks in very diverse industries and diverse geographies. And the really striking thing is that, if you take a room of 100 workers in the private sector, only 6 out of those 100 people will either be a member or represented by a labor union. And if you add in public sector government workers, it's not that doesn't change by that much. Does get better somewhat. But very few workers are touched by unionism directly, and the same is true globally. Globally, I think it's about 10% or so workers in the entire world that are represented or are members of unions. So what has struck me is that with like all of the motion in the working class, all the excitement, as I said before, like the vast majority of us remain screwed, like going to work. And when we're screwed at work and not well organized at work, we're screwed in our society. We get the oligarch economy and oligarch society like we live in today. So what I've kind of, more than anything in these last 20 or 25 years of doing this work have come to believe is that it's really workers in industries, in workplaces, in cities, at companies who actually have the unique wisdom, the unique ability, the unique power to figure out union models that ultimately will work. So I'm one of the people out there that is not for the idea of saying the labor movement just needs to do this one thing and your union needs to do X. And if you do X really well with a lot of discipline and a lot of heart, sooner or later you're going to prevail, because it just has not been the case. The labor movement in the U.S. has been down essentially since 1950, simplifying slightly, but that's basically the graph. So I actually find myself in Philly and had the opportunity to be here because I put pen to paper on a book on this stuff, and I'm here in Philadelphia on the book tour called Unions of Our Own, and it's about a framework that coworkers can use to actually design and refine their own unions. I'm thrilled that I have more than a few passages actually on the Workers United campaign at Starbucks. I raise up some things which in my experience are deeply new and exciting and different. You know, we just heard about the continued growth in union density at Starbucks. Cannot tell you how remarkable that is. This is a barista, former barista telling you this. After so much union busting, that day after day, baristas in this campaign continue to choose unionism. That's an incredibly important piece. One thing in the model that I shout out, and I want everyone to go and be inspired by, is the baristas of today. And we didn't have social media when we got started. But social media alone, that's just that you can't say, oh, social media, yeah, all the things are going to happen. We need to happen because we have social media now. You have to kind of bake it into the model. And if you notice in the Starbucks campaign of today, when workers achieve milestones in their Starbucks stores, like winning an election, for example, like it's baked into the membership experience, right? You make content about it. You share about it. You share about your priorities. You share about the union busting. You share about the victories. And that helps really create a kind of a viral loop of sorts that has continued against all this union busting. The company has not been able to shut down the growth in workers choosing unionism. So that's sort of like the pitch or the invitation I have for folks assembled and watching at home, to really trust in the wisdom and power of your coworkers. Nobody knows how to do this better than you guys, but not to start with a blank slate, to use frameworks that help you have really good conversations, to know where the decisions are that you'll make, but to know what some of those decisions are. And as importantly, to have a connection to working class wisdom that has come before. Because our forebears going back a long time, they have figured out some stuff. They figured out some tools and methods that are useful, whichever model ultimately you're going to build.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Sylvia.
Is this working? Oh, sweet. Yeah, I mean, in terms of organizational model, like we were saying, it's highly worker-led and worker-organized. And we, the basic unit of our campaign is the organizing committee in the store. But we have, we organize at the regional level so that we can address problems like across cities, across states, wherever there's sort of like common interests. And then we're organized at a national level too, keeping everybody on program, like, building plans, voting on them, and then executing them, all with, the same goals in mind, of creating more and more pressure on the company. And its workers, doing that, organizing at every level, which is really special. And also just that we are very action happy. The answer is always do a march on the boss, when something is wrong, and that's hard. It's hard to do. Not everyone's ready for it, but we know that that's what actually moves the needle. And I think the vast majority of workers, even unionized workers, represented workers, never go on strike. And we've, pulled off, I think I lose track, like I think 10 national unfair labor practice strikes, some of which for single days, a few days, and our most recent one for, many months, which is, it's energizing. It's a departure from how a lot of organizing has been done in the last few decades. And it's, I think sometimes the problem that our staff people are faced with is keeping workers from acting, taking huge risks. Like people are so energized and want to take action. And I think that just really speaks to like where a lot of our, momentum has come from is just being very like militant and prepared to actually take action collectively. And all of our leverage comes from not just our strike readiness, but our ability to confront our bosses at work. Like Daniel was saying, to create public pressure. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Zachary, I'm not sure if you have more to add to that.
Yeah, sure. I think, from the perspective of what salting contributed to the overall kind of approach to organizing, I think the purpose of salting, right, is always to bolster, to identify, to empower that worker-led center, right, that every organizing campaign lives or dies on, right? And so I think salts really view themselves as a catalyst, right, for drawing the sort of latent energy in a workplace, right, and helping bring forward the workers that might not self-identify or recognize themselves as leaders before they have been introduced, right, to maybe the knowledge of how a union is organized and the general process, some of the best practices. So I think the purpose of SALT's really, one, to act as an information gathering agent, right? But more importantly, I think to help draw out the leaders in a workplace, to make them feel empowered, to make them feel supported, right? To be a line of transmitting knowledge to workers. And I think also in workplaces where that are characterized by very rapid turnover, SALTs can also serve as a sort of institution, like a repository of institutional knowledge and memory, right? Sometimes it can be really helpful to think back and reflect how workplace conditions have degraded or worsened in just a period of 6 months, a year, right? But workers that are coming in don't have access to that memory, right? And can't feel aggrieved or know like what they stand to gain, right? And what has been lost. So I think those are various roles that the SALT plays in the organizing model. And I think to an extent, right, the real viral growth of the Starbucks organizing campaign outside of Buffalo, not necessarily where the original organizers anticipated it coming from, really speaks to the power of unlocking that self-realization that like anybody can do this, that anyone can be part of this movement, and that they're not alone in it.
Yeah, thank you. And Gershom, I'm sure there are the more generalizable things here.
Yeah, I've got way too much to say on all these topics for our time. I'll try to limit myself to maybe 2 or 3 points. One of which is that what people are describing, I just want to emphasize that this sounds really good. It is really rare. What SBWU does is not the traditional model. And it was a gigantic break from the traditional model, which is very staff heavy, is not about turning workers into protagonists, but by organizing on behalf of workers, and tends to create unions, therefore, where workers do not feel ownership of them, but feel that they're essentially like, you know, you've contracted an agency to negotiate you a better contract or something. So, and you might say, but this is the only thing SBWU could possibly have done, because you have so many different shops and you've got to organize each of them. You're not going to send one staffer for every 11 people. You need to teach people to organize themselves and to have that multiplicative scaling where, you know, you teach your shop how to organize, and each one of those people can then go teach another shop how to organize, and so on and so on. And that is the same sort of thing that we believe in EWOC, is both helping people learn, not substituting for them, not being staff heavy. They have to be able to be empowered to create their own democratic institutions. And then you need that scaling, because what we understand we are doing, and what SBWU has done, and is so evident in Jazz's book, is we are not just organizing a shop. We are teaching a generation of people how to organize so they can teach a broader generation of people how to organize in a way that will scale out and transform how everybody in society relates to work and their power at work and what they are able to do. And that cannot happen when you are limited to the resources of staff. So this is a vastly different model. And it also is a risky model from the standpoint of traditional union leadership, because if you empower your whole membership, who knows what they're going to do? And you've already described this difficulty. Sometimes they're going to want to take actions that are way too risky, and then you got to talk them out of it. And that's a very difficult dynamic. And in some ways, what happened to maybe some of the conservative union leadership is it got so used to having to tell people, no, we can't do that. That's too risky. That's all it knew how to do anymore. And you have to be walking that line where you're making the dangerous mistakes on both sides, rather than staying all the way in the safe corner if you're ever going to grow, right? You got to have skin in the game. You got to get on the court if you're going to win. That's one point. And the other point, I guess, to touch on really briefly, is there's an old famous article by A.J. Muskie that a lot of people talk about when they talk about what is the difficulties of organizing. And he distinguishes between the town hall and the army. And it says, well, a union has elements of a town hall, and we all get together and talk about elements of an army where you got to have discipline. And I was thinking about that, preparing for this, and I realized I just don't like this at all, because that presumes a certain sort of army, which is the American, you know, the very military army. And it presumes a town hall that's just an ineffective talk shop. Now, if you look at sort of the things that might inspire some of us as leftists around the world, you will see their armies run on very different models. And, you know, and that have sort of smaller units that can act freely and that are based on an energized and mobilized and politicized populace. This is, for example, why the U.S. lost in Vietnam. The boss has a lot going on us. But what we have is political consciousness and the masses. And to make that real, you have to organize in a way that empowers all those people, which, you know, not to stretch the military analogy too far, is the difference, right, between guerrilla-style organizing and top-down organizing and getting everyone in formation and going out onto that field where the boss always has the high ground. And if you want guerrilla-style organizing, you have to trust all those workers. You have to trust all those little commando units to work in sync because they're on the same page and because they believe in it, not just because somebody is giving them orders. So that is the difference between a protagonistic organizing model of empowering and scaling and a top-down organizing model. And I don't want to say that any union has ever done any of this perfectly, but I think in the high notes of some of the most impressive things SPW has done and most inspiring things, you can definitely see that there. And that is the same sort of thing that in the high notes of what we try to accomplish in EWOC, we try to advocate and to teach people to do as well. And this also comes with a lot of failures and a lot of fizzles. But it's because there is like no shop unorganizable, like no problem too small. And the victory isn't coming because we have like the one technocratic leader with the solution. It's becoming because we're going to just, there's more of us than there are of them, and we're going to keep teaching each other how to do it. And we're going to keep trying until we get enough wins and until that changes how everyone operates with each other.
And before we move on to the next question, just want to have an opportunity if anyone has any thoughts after the other comments. Very briefly, like less than a minute.
Yeah, we do all that stuff.
All right. So we have 2 more questions. This next one before the lessons is very important because it's about the solidarity with Palestine and how important that was for Starbucks Workers United. And also the other international solidarity that Daniel has already talked about briefly. So I wonder first if, Sylvia, you can tell us about Starbucks Workers United's solidarity with Palestine.
Sure. Yeah, so, okay, fun story. Back in 2023, on October 7th, our union posted solidarity with Palestinian people. And the company, not anticipating where the zeitgeist was going to go, put up on one.starbucks.com, which is their like union busting propaganda subsite, an article that said, we strongly condemn like terrorist sympathizers, Workers United, basically. And Howard Schultz, who wasn't even the CEO at the time, was going to right-wing Zionist organizations and giving them lists of union stores and saying, I wish I could fire all these fucking people. And it created this really interesting dynamic of backlash where some right-wingers who don't know what a union is thought that Starbucks was in solidarity with Palestine. And then Starbucks's, retaliation against our union is actually what led to the international boycott against Starbucks. It was never about Starbucks being invested in apartheid or, financially tied to the IDF. It was people were so primed by hearing about other companies that were invested in apartheid that they just added Starbucks to the list when people were, when there was backlash for them trying to use that as a union busting opportunity. They sued our union for copyright infringement, for, creating that confusion if that even happened. We countersued them for defamation. It was a whole thing. And we really quickly, democratically put together a statement where we clarified our positions on these things and doubled down on solidarity with the Palestinian people. It was a whirlwind at the time. It's interesting to think about it, how it fits into our larger strategy of pressure and where our leverage comes from, and what ingredients led to the company conceding the first time and coming to the bargaining table. Because I think maybe not the answer that people expect is, I think it's convenient to think that if we just create enough outrage and backlash about something that it'll lead to this moment, but it's extremely hard to control. And it was everything about the zeitgeist at the time that people were ready to accept that. And I don't know that people would be ready to accept that now, or would be so energized and so united in boycotting the company. And it's very difficult to call for a boycott of Starbucks, to get anyone to stop shopping at Starbucks. You know, it's gargantuan, and it's maybe not where most of our leverage comes from, but it's definitely an ingredient in what has created pressure on the company. So I don't know. There's sort of a lot of different ways to think about it. It was a really important moment, and I think we were one of, if not definitely the first, at least American labor organization to have anything to say about Palestine, at least since it sort of entered the public conscious in 2023. And it's also a very hard thing to reproduce. So a lot to chew on there, but very proud of it. It was very stressful at the time, but I'm really proud of our stance on that. And I mean, the domino effect of, you know, that social media post leading to like Starbucks pulling out of international markets due to global backlash is like, it's incredible. It's really wild.
Yes, please.
I think a really interesting component of this story too is that, you know, throughout the conceptualizing of the Starbucks campaign, we were constantly grappling with like what is the effective hammer, right? What is the resort? What recourse do we have in the event that Starbucks, right, behaves unlawfully, right, violates the law, busts the union, and consumer boycott was always loomed really large as the potential and most potent hammer. But I think there was, maybe Sylvia, you have more insight into this, but as I understand it, there was significant political opposition to this from some levels of the international union organizing, and that really hampered the ability to call for a boycott. But the action of standing in solidarity with oppressed people and opposing genocide, right, and the corporations' kind of reflexive rejection of that, right, created the opportunity for creating real accountability. And so that we see what can emerge organically, right, when you stick to your principles. Yeah.
Can I just keep going on that, because this is delicious. I think the organic aspect of it is what made it successful. I do think that there's a correct analysis of how far a boycott can go, especially in that it takes an immense amount of work to make a boycott happen unless it spreads like wildfire, like in this sort of, you know, flash in the pan sort of moment. And what our union has decided is really the priority is growing our union. We could be spending a lot of time, you know, we could be dumping a majority of our resources into growing a boycott by talking directly to customers, but that would mean less resources into growing our union and expanding our membership and growing our leverage that way. So I think like we have been tried to walk that line and figure out like how much should we lean on. We need the public to support us, but how much should that be where all of our time and effort goes is calling for a boycott. And also, you know, we have asked customers to not shop at Starbucks until we have a contract, and I think the leverage of that is weakened when the company puts up good numbers, you know, in a quarter. It starts to make that look like much less of a threat, which I think is why we continue to come back to we need to grow as the, you know, the first and foremost objective. But that we hope as we continue to grow that, you know, the public will continue to empathize with us and choose to support us that way.
You want to add something? Oh, please.
Okay, just briefly. I'd like to really thank Starbucks Workers United for standing with the Palestinian movement in that moment. I can only imagine how difficult that was. SUN, Solidarity Union Network, anti-imperialism is really central to how we think about our work, and just love to see anti-empire unionism, both because, of course, it's the only moral way to do unionism, but it's also really the most strategic and most powerful way to do it as well. You know, capital is extremely global, very global system. These are very global companies that many of us are fighting against. And there's something really, really missed if we kind of fall for these national borders, honestly, even more than the companies do. Like, I never want capitalists to be more global than labor. So there's some real power in that. I think it's really important to surface that labor in many regards actually has been exactly on the opposite side that our courageous baristas have taken, and to try to kind of understand that and many other things that might frustrate us about some aspects of the traditional labor movement. I think it's vital to really look at the question of union model. And I'm very lucky. I get to speak with many workers, and mostly are visionary workers. Like the reactionary folks in our class tend not to find me. So I have that good fortune. And again, workers I get to accompany want to do unionism that brings, for example, racial and gender justice to the forefront, right? Trans liberation to the forefront, anti-imperialism to the forefront. And it's like, but is this possible? And there's definitely important work that has to be done, whether you're starting a union from scratch or revitalizing an existing union, to make sure we're not, for example, you know, some campaigns go for contracts, others go for other types of agreements. There's different ways to hold gains. But if, for example, how your company shows up in the community, what type of deal, does your company have a deal with ICE, questions of control, questions of strike power, it's really key to hone in on the full questions of unionism. How does governance work, right? A lot of times in unionism, they're like, hey, your job is to organize your coworkers and get into the union. But like, it's above your pay grade to actually ask questions about what is the structure of the union you're organizing into. I reject that fully. I think it's really up to us and our coworkers to get to weigh in on those questions of, for example, governance structure, how we hold our gains, things we like, things we don't. Because even the most visionary unions, if they don't have a model that's in accord, a model that allows that vision to be expressed rather than continually like dragging at it, we're not going to get to where we need to go. Just as like a final note, I'd like to raise up a very urgent situation in the coffee industry as well. A different union called Blue Bottle Independent Union started in Boston. Now they're organizing around the country, kind of a somewhat sibling allies of many of the groups that are in the room today. Their company is owned by Nestle, which is the largest food company in the world. It was something beautiful that I got to take part in on behalf of Sun, which was to connect the Blue Bottle workers in Boston with their coworkers at Nestle in a very large Nestle manufacturing complex in Colombia, 2-3 hours out of Cali, Colombia, where workers are going up against an incredibly brutal attempt to outright destroy their union, which has included, for example, the company Nestle collaborating with paramilitaries, which has sadly murdered some of the workers, amongst many other tactics to defeat the union. So the baristas went out there. There's a 24/7 struggle camp at the factory and did beautiful solidarity. And not just beautiful in that there was a lot of beautiful solidarity, but there was also a lot of brass tacks, strategy and tactics discussed that folks are currently building out. So that's the Sinal Trainal Labor Union in Bugala Grande, Colombia, in solidarity with Nestle baristas. here in the United States, which I think is the kind of example that we should really be inspired by. If we're organizing here in the global north and there's some type of connection, and there always is, with global south coworkers or folks in the supply chain, and we're not trying to build and connect and find each other, frankly, that's kind of problematic, to put it in the negative way. And it's extremely powerful and inspiring to actually do it, to put it in the positive.
Can I jump in really quick just to add something super short to that? I think specifically on like things like anti-imperialism, it can be overwhelming to face the scope of what we're up against and how much injustice there is and how much needs to be addressed. And when things get worse and worse in this country and globally, it's like, it can be paralyzing. And the way I stay motivated is just always coming back to like, okay, if we want to address the American empire, we need to grow the left. If we want to grow the left, we have to grow the labor movement. We need organized labor. And if we want to do that, we have to win a fucking contract that continues to prove to service workers that this can be done. So like, no matter what the sort of struggle is, I'm like, contract now. And I think that keeps me going.
So I guess we're sort of moving to conclusion, and you gave me the perfect setup, because this is what I wanted to talk about, which is the same problem that we encounter in so many of our EWOC campaigns. Is what we discovered is, and more than that, but the basic thing, what has been rediscovered, is we know how to talk to enough people to get the supermajority to sign the cards, and then to vote the way we want, we hope, not always, in the election. And then we get the legal ability to compel the right to bargain. What we do not have is the power to get the company to give us anything. With all that work we've done, we've built some structures. You need a lot more to get that contract than you need to get the ability for the court to say to the company, well, you better bargain with them. And this has been, Starbucks really exemplifies the difference in power necessary. Amazon Labor Union, which came their victory about a half a year later from the first Starbucks victories. One thing I want to note timeline-wise is the first Starbucks victories, right, came in December. And then before December was November. Before that was October, which we called Striketober, because there was such a confluence. And I think that had to do with those victories of, at the time, John Deere, Keebler, I think, some medical unions all striking at once, people seeing that happening. And that upsurge in strikes and those victories from those strikes was part of what inspired people to want to unionize too. But then to take that power and really have a winning strike is a whole different story. And that's where we're at. So on that, I wanted to have a couple quick remarks, which is that law can get us recognition, but it can't get us a contract. Not only that, it stands into the way of some of the best ways to get a contract. And one thing SBWU has been able to do is by having it sort of strike actions when it wants. That's been very powerful. You can't do that once you sign a contract with a no-strike clause. People sign away their own power. It's not just the law, it's the contract they sign, give away even more power on top of that. So how do you get the actions you need? If law follows action, what precedes action is creating the conditions where that action can win, which are broader social conditions than just the workers. You need the organized workers, and then you need the massive society to be ready to stand by you. When you look at the 1930s, why did they not go to jail the moment they occupied those plants? Because public sentiment thought it was right. They were like, no, they're their plants. They work there. Those plants are the workers in a sense. But that was because of the whole of society, not just because of those workers. You needed both. And I think SBWU, in the scale and vision of what it's been doing, has some idea of what that means, that you have to move the whole of society to allow the hammer of the workers themselves to proceed unimpeded without the state standing in the way of that. And so that's just a big picture thought. And then I want to end with, I think, a happy note, which is Kickstarter workers, First Tech Workers Union, won an amazing contract last year after a protracted 45-plus day strike, and they got a 4-day work week. After that, the company engaged in reprisals against them. It fired a number of them. Yesterday, I was at a rally with them, and we went out afterwards to chat against these reprisals and go sign their letter. And they were talking about, well, we don't know why after those 45 days when we thought the company would never give, they gave. And then one of them was, and then they said, you know what, I think it was. At Kickstarter, the company hired Littler Mendelsohn, same as the Starbucks firm. And, they hired him because, they're the best union busters. But then, when they finally settled, it was right before the Starbucks workers were going on strike. And I think Littler Mendelsohn said to them, gee, it's been real working with you, best 45 days of my life, but I got a bigger customer who's going to pay me more, so you better just, we got to skedaddle. So I think the Starbucks strike, quite possibly, is what caused the Kickstarter strike to win. And that's an element of the material fact of solidarity. And this idea that we're not just fighting this or that battle. We are in a war, and a war has many campaigns and many fronts. And if we get too narrow and only think of winning each battle, we don't see that. And the fact, though, that if you have a flanking action over here, some other workers come in and swoop a victory over there, I think is very powerful to think about in the context of what it means to build the whole of the labor movement, regardless of what union you're affiliated to or any union at all. Right, the bosses all have one law firm, so they're the same boss in that sense.
This seems like a great time to move to Q&A. Thank you, everyone, for speaking so far, and I'm looking forward to people's questions, and also, while I can, fuck Littler Mendelsohn. So
Yeah,
I'm just going to turn the mic over.
over.
I'm just going to, hand the mic over to someone who, if people want to go, just raise your hand and we should have enough slack on the mic. But if not, just walk up here. And don't be shy too. And we can also do Q&A after we cut the video, if people want to do that too. So.
Okay, I'll ask the question that hasn't been answered here, and the answer might just be no. But are there any through lines or connections between the IWW campaign and the Workers United campaign? Or are they just two episodes of the same company?
In terms of spirit,
Think broad.
or literally the
anything.
same people.
Yeah.
I mean, because I think I didn't know a lot of what you were talking about, the wins that you got, but I think, yeah, we owe everything to the people who came before us, and it sounds like our campaigns operate very similarly, and similarly prioritized worker-to-worker organizing and sort of a bottom-up strategy. So yeah, so through line and spirit for sure. I'm not sure if you're asking if there's actual people who are around for both in the same organizations. I don't think so, but.
I can give an answer very specifically on the legal front, which is, and this is covered in, again, the Heat the Ground Up podcast, which is a great podcast, which is there was a very specific important legal victory won by the IWW campaign, which was that you could organize and get an election per store rather than just, per vast region. And that is effectively what made the organizing that was later done possible, was that you had that decision that let you have elections at a scale you could win instead of fully on the boss's terms. And I believe also the IWW campaign then made the very wise decision to, part of pivoting away, speak more to this, from pursuing the sole recognition front, was they didn't want to imperil that decision when the NLRB changed composition. So they left it in place as a gift to the next people who came, who then took it up and ran with it. Well, I'm so good.
Yeah, I mean, my take on this is, to keep in the center the folks who have stirred in these last few years, our friends at Starbucks Workers United. Definitely all the glory and love and honor for them. what they've done and are doing. I think there is something beautiful. I think in Latin America they use like basically the term like fabric, that there's like a fabric of struggle that we're a part of. There's ebbs and flows. Sometimes we know our inspirations and influences. Sometimes we don't. Like when I came of age at Borders and started trying to do my irresponsible organizing strategy there, I somehow there was something in the water, although I didn't know about it, that there was actually a surge of bookstore workers like in the late 90s and early 2000s, and I was kind of riding that crest, like not even knowing it. And similar at Starbucks. Howard Schultz, whose infamous name, thankfully, has been brought into this space because we should all know this person's name and know how disgusting this human being is when it comes to workers' rights. He had bought this small little coffee company called Starbucks, a tiny thing, but Starbucks Corporation is Howard Schultz. The operating plant engineers, they were organized and their union was broken by Schultz. Later, after we were already in motion, we started connecting with some of those folks that were doing that work. There was even stores before Howard Schultz took over the company that were union stores that we didn't even know about. We kind of connected with that history later. So sometimes, you don't even really know exactly what's influencing you and inspiring you. But in terms of like direct collaboration, through our general counsel, IWW Starbucks Workers Union was asked and extremely happy to turn over transcripts from our trials and legal stuff to these folks' counsel. But that was pretty much the extent of like direct collaboration. So there's just not to overstate the role, but yeah, I think there's definitely a beautiful I mean, I'm kind of a romantic on these things, and I really trace it back to, I go back to like 1880s, right? We just celebrated May Day Haymarket, and I truly believe like every right that we have, every campaign that we make achievements in, and I truly believe this, we are really part of the fabric of folks who have struggled, have developed techniques. So basically shout out to everybody at any time who has chosen solidarity, who has done work standing up with coworkers against bosses. And I hope that we're in an era that we're just going to keep pushing it to higher and higher levels.
Any other questions when recorded? Go ahead.
Something I think is interesting about the Starbucks Workers United campaign is the salting being so publicly known. Like, I think so many people have found out what salting is because of this campaign. And so I'm kind of just interested to hear more about that aspect of the campaign. I don't have like a specific question, but I'd kind of just like to hear more and like hear your thoughts and the theory of it, I guess, as well as like, I guess how that part of the campaign ended, because I don't think I actually don't know, is salting still a part of the campaign and so on?
Yeah, I can't speak to whether, salts and inside organizers are still being actively recruited for the Starbucks campaign itself, although I'm confident that inside organizing is an important tool, right, that Workers United, particularly the Rochester Regional Board, embraces. I think there's an interesting tension with salting, right? Because the whole concept is based on relational organizing, which has its essence in trust, right? And then there is this kind of countervailing imperative towards secrecy. And so striking that balance can be really hard, right? I think a lot of us grappled with the nature of deception in our work. And being forthright. I think often we erred too much on the side of being circumspect and being secretive. I think one of the best lessons that we took from the organizing campaign is that the sooner that you can bring in, you know, like what we colloquially call the peppers, or, you know, the workers in the workplace, that have already been there, that weren't planted, so to speak, right? Bringing them forward and into the fold, and showing them, you know, what's going on, the full picture is really important. I think once we had the flexibility to come forward with the role that we played in those early days of the campaign, I think that was helpful also for helping propagate this as a tactic, right? Which was really important, and also for helping other people, right, that might not have a formal relationship with a union, right, but are going to be going into future workplaces and are going to want to be organizing and are going to be, you know, inside organizers in everything but name, right? And so helping people recognize that the role that they could adopt and play, helping legitimize and popularize this as a tactic, I think was really important, and something that was really advantageous once we could tell our story a little bit more forthrightly.
It's not over. It hasn't ended. And you should do it. What's your excuse? You know, it's something anybody can do. And I think also, even beyond just getting hired with the intention of it, most people know someone who works at Starbucks, or has like a cousin or like a friend of a friend who works at Starbucks. And you should have them reach out to us. Whoever you are out there, you should have them reach out to us. And I think, like you said, yeah, people who are inside organizers and everything but name, it's like, doesn't have to be so formal. And if you need a job and if you want to be part of something, you should do it.
Anyone else?
Sorry, I just realized I should give the
Go ahead.
pitch. DSA has a program called WOW, Workers Organizing Workers. It coordinates with a lot of different unions to help place salts in a lot of different places. So if you're someone who's interested in salting in general, and maybe don't know what industry or whatever, look up Workers Organizing Workers. It's not the only initiative out there, but we're at an event sponsored. I feel obligated to mention.
You should probably plug your own things then.
Plug
Yeah.
Inside Organizer School as well, right?
iOS rules.
And they're coming around. They're highly mobile. If you're interested in having an iOS training session, reach out to them, and they'd be more than happy to facilitate that.
Best trainings in the whole.
Anything else anyone wants to plug? Or
Yeah, so if anything resonated around this idea of grabbing a hold of full union models, the full spectrum of unionism, either to start a new project or to strengthen and renew an existing union project, if any of that resonates at all, there's a website associated with the book I have out now called unionsofourown.org, which is full of free resources. There are trainings. The flagship training is called Introduction to Union Model Design. There's also free tools that you can use. And through a collaboration with Solidarity Union Network, you can also have a one-on-one confidential conversation with someone about problems you might be experiencing at work, and then work through some potential options to support you further in getting those problems solved.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I'll plug StarbucksWorkersUnited.org to get involved.
If you're interested in helping out learning how to mentor campaigns of all sorts across all industries, Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee. If you are an experienced organizer, we'll plug you into campaigns right away. If you have never organized and don't know anything about it, we have trainings and we have apprenticeships and we have things that you can start helping with on day one while you learn the skills to then help people organize and develop. So you can go from 0 to 60 in the labor movement and start helping campaigns tomorrow. Emergency Workplace Organizing Committee, organizeworkers.org or workerorganizing.org.
EWOC is awesome. It's sick.
All right, so I think that's good. Thanks to all our panelists for this great discussion.
Thanks for a great discussion.
Thank you. Yes.
Did you cut it? Yeah.